I'll do my best.
Okay.
Okay. So first of all, thank you all for having me here. I've never gotten a chance to speak at a UX meetup before, so this is exciting for me. I'm Keita Wangari. I'll actually tell you a little bit more about myself a little bit later. So why this chat? What do I want to get across to you? Why are you here? If you read the description of this session, these are some of the questions that you probably came here with. So how might people use something new that you have, a new product that you're thinking about, just a new idea, a new feature? How do you innovate in your space? Or how do you reimagine something that you already have? So you've got a lot of problems with a process that you have, and you want to just, you know what, let's just start over and just reimagine this. This is one of my favorite quotes from Mark Ackerman, who's a leader in HCI, CSCW, designs. Well, I'll just read it exactly instead of paraphrasing it, but designs must always be put to work in particular contexts, adopted and adapted by people in the course of practice. That's a favorite of mine because where I tend to focus my research is foundational research. So in my 4.5 years at Google, that's been primarily what I work on. And I like understanding how people are going to use something. So that's pretty much the basis of what we'll be talking about. What I want to get across is that making decisions about products and product design with no understanding of how it's actually going to be used day to day, every day, over time, 6 months, a year, 2 years in practice is very risky. But there are things you can do. There's research that you can do, and that's what I wanted to just chat about. I don't have a long presentation, but I want to chat about that because a lot of the research that I see tends to be focused in one phase of product development. So we'll talk about that. So a little bit about me. I'm a cloud art photographer. That lends no credibility to anything that I'm going to actually talk to you about tonight, but I just like to share that. And it's actual real clouds, nothing to do with Google Cloud, even though I work in Google Cloud. So I was super excited though when I started in cloud, because I've only been in cloud for about 1.5 years. I was in another team prior to that, that on the 4th floor in the building that I work in, the conference rooms are named after cloud formations. And I knew every single one of them. So I was really excited about that. And if I had a prize to give away, I would give $500. I don't have it to give to you, but I would if there's anyone who could name at least 4 of these scientific formations. Is there any? Well, we'll get to it. We'll do this later. I won't spend time on it, but couple of those were actually captured in the parking lot out here. So that center one is an anvil, and caught that just coming out of the building. And the third one in the top row was a really recent one. Some optical effects there. All right, moving on. I am also a collector of mid-century 3D viewers. Something else about me that has nothing to do with my credibility talking to you today. But if you want to know what those things are, that's what they are. And if I had another $500 to give, it would be to the person who could tell me which one of these is a view master. There's a dead giveaway in the picture, but I actually don't collect Viewmasters. But I love to point out that Google Cardboard was not the first to give cardboard immersive experiences. That third picture in the middle row is from the 1930s, and it's a 3D cardboard viewer. The Viewmaster is the bottom row, the middle one. The giveaway is the round reel there. All right, moving on to actually why you would want to know about me. So I've been doing, like I said, research at Google for how long? 4.5 years. And I have traveled all over the world. One of the nice things about working at Google, coming to Google. I had never been anywhere before coming to Google. I have been to the Philippines 3 times, Brazil, London, all of it doing enterprise research. So inside various companies, trying to understand how people put our designs into practice every day, and just exploring, trying to understand places that we can innovate. What are we missing about what they do? Questions that don't typically get answered with some of the standard usability research activities that normally happen. So a little bit about research and development. So I'm really excited at Google that the Eng teams I've had the opportunity to work with are really receptive to having research, but they don't always know what to do with it. Sometimes they're new to working with a researcher. They don't know how to incorporate the research findings into their development lifecycle. And often people in UX don't either. There's I just sort of simplified the development cycle here. I know there's a lot more that goes into it, but let's just talk about 3 phases: before launch, the launch, and after the launch. So a lot of what I see happen in user experience research happens right there in the design and build phase. So what goes into the design? Are we on the right track? Less often, but I do see it still more often than early on, is after the launch. So how is this version doing? So, you know, are people satisfied with it? What's the NPS for it? How many people are clicking on this versus clicking on that? What should we do in the next iteration? So that's sort of the assess and refine phase, where I like to work, and what I want to call your attention to and your focus, and we can chat about, is the explore and strategize phase. So even before you start to design and build. So who are the real users, and what are their needs? What are their goals? What are their motivations? What is what's driving them? So when I see questions like this, what's the best way to build something? How should the UI support something? Is this designed to this? Is this too blue? Is this too small? You know, I see a lot of that, and I get asked as a researcher to look into these issues. And that's in the design and build phase. They're important questions. But again, it tends to be what a lot of Eng and PM want, is to answer these questions. Also, how often do they this? How many are doing that? So I get those questions. And again, I feel like those are more toward the end. Now, I will say those can also be exploratory questions. It just depends on how you ask them. But typically, they are framed in relation to something that's already been put out there, and trying to understand how often are they doing something with what we've already launched. The questions I don't see asked enough are, why do or don't they this? Where's the most pain when they're doing something? What are the workarounds and the hacks? Have you ever seen anyone hack something that you've developed? Do you think they're using it one way? Turns out when you actually sit and watch them, they're actually doing something completely different with it. Which needs should we focus on? There are lots of needs out there. Who are they working with? Who are they collaborating with? Across a process, is it the same person? Or did another person appear in the process and then it went back to the other person and you actually don't even know about that person in the middle? What are the triggers? So how are people moving through a process that they're doing? What's triggering that? And then what are we missing? What do we not know? What do we not even know to ask about, right? So those are some of the questions that I feel like if you're exploring and strategizing, those are the questions that you should be asking. So I wanted to put those questions first before I got into methods. Now, this is not an exhaustive list of methods, but I'll throw up a few, and I'm sure you're familiar with these ones in the middle. So usability tests, Cognitive walkthroughs, heuristic evaluations, diary studies, survey appears in all of them. I'll just tell you now. You can use surveys for lots of things. After launching, got usage data, logs, got user complaints from the support, frontline support, benchmark tests, and again, surveys. But what are some of those methods that are going to help you answer the exploratory questions? This is not all of them, just a few. So journey mapping is something, and I'll just tell you now, that's actually something I'm going to focus on in the talk. It's something that I've used extensively here at Google, both in the team that I was on before and on the team that I'm on now. And we have found it to be really valuable. We've done it in all sorts of ways. I'll talk about a few of them. Job shadowing, so like direct observation of people. That doesn't need a lot of description. User interviews, critical user journeys. That's a controversial one. CUJS. How many people have worked with CUJS? Critical. Oh, okay. Not. All right. Well, I was thinking that was going to be sort of a dry talk, but I'll talk a little bit more on that. Contextual inquiry, diary studies, and again, surveys. And so I am going to talk about actually tying those three together. So journey mapping, what is that? It's getting people together, either one person or a team of people going into a room, and we've got cards, and there are all sorts of cards. You can pull up templates. I'll show you a few that we've used. And you just start mapping out the process of doing something. It could be a short process. It could be a long process. And along the way, you ask questions about who they interact with, what systems they're using. And it helps answer some of these questions. So I'm just pulling from that list that you saw earlier. Who are they working with to accomplish things? Because this is where it will come out when all of a sudden, when you're asking on each step, who's doing this step? Who's doing this step? Who's doing this step? You'll find out, well, this is our billing department. Well, this is our accounts receivable person that does this. And you find out there's somebody who actually doesn't even have access that actually needs some information that you didn't know about. What are the triggers for various things? And then what are we missing about the process? So just to show you the evolution of some of the cards that I've used, here was an early one I started with. And these were like put on glossy cardstock, cut out. I had asked the step, and then there's some fields there just to remember, for me to remember to ask about certain things. And some things I would circle: is this done by phone? Is this done, with a document or by chat? Or how often does this happen? Is this a step that is being measured at all? Are you being audited on what happens at this step? And that's always good to know, because if there's any way that you can help them collect that data, a lot of times when I would observe a process, they would be doing something and then cutting and pasting information into a spreadsheet. And the reason was because they were going to be asked about that step by some other team later. And so if you can innovate and add something where that information is captured for them at that step and put into some meaningful format, that's great. And we've done that. So this is a different form, a little bit the same. But then I just started shortening it because I found myself not actually writing in everything on the form. So I simplified it, made it smaller, and the ease of execution is something that we would use these colored dots and would ask, how easy or difficult is this particular step? And it was really nice to get a visual and this is like one of the slides that I took out of like some examples of how we've done this, but we would sometimes just do this on a table. Other times we'd have a felt board. And so we'd attach like Velcro strips to the backs of these. And then we'd have like just something that they could just kind of shift everything around. But we get a really nice visual of green, yellows, reds, of just how this process starts to fail, where it starts to break down. Is it entirely red? And of course, asking questions. If something gets a red, we really want to dig in and know why. This is, we also do this remotely. So this was just something that a template that I used just to do it online. It was just easier to type into, and we still use the dots as well. So I'll get back to that. I'll show like a sort of an outcome of what that looked like after we analyzed it and put it all together. So direct observation. So the difference with this is we're going to actually sit down and watch somebody do something. So that's not new to any of you. I don't have any additional slides on this. But one of the, obviously one of the pros to doing this is that people will forget. You bring them into a room, they don't remember. And also you're asking them about things that they do. And what they forget to tell you, or would not even think to tell you, are things they don't do. And when you're actually watching them, so really important, I should have bolded it, but in addition to noting system usage is also noting non-usage. When you think they would be using a feature and you watch them and they don't. I have seen, there's like the little icon that someone is supposed to use to copy something that's in a field. They don't even know what that means. And they're not even using it. Now, that's not something that probably would have come up doing journey mapping, but it's additional information that when you're actually watching, you can see these things. Team interactions, lack of team interactions. I sat and watched people. They're supposed to maybe be putting into the system some communication, but the person sits right next to them. They just lean over and tell them, and it never gets captured in the system. So when you actually are sitting in and observing how an office works, you'll see things like that that might not be captured when you're actually doing journey mapping. Something else that came out of direct observation was actually at a company that I worked at previously. We were trying to customize an object in Salesforce. And we decided we would just sit and watch people when they were doing a particular task. And we'd also ask them about it. So we'd gone around and interviewed and asked, how do you go through this process? And we got a lot of information. Sitting and watching, though, we were noticing that as they were putting information into this field, they would look at a piece of paper that they had on their desk. And then they'd go back and then they'd start typing in. And we started, what is that you're looking at? And everyone had like their own version of it. And basically what it was is they had these canned responses to things that they kept in a document, and they would look at it and then they would like type it in. What we ended up doing is designing something so that they could save their most used canned responses in the system and then just have them available without having to go to this extra sheet of paper. But it was just something, it wasn't very difficult for the Eng team to actually put that in. And it was something that we would have missed had we not been there. And it was not even anything they thought they'd been doing that for so long, they didn't even think to mention that was something they were doing. So it allowed us to kind of do something a little bit innovative. So some of the questions, what are workarounds, hacks? What do they do? What are they not doing? Why? And then again, what are we missing about the process? So critical user journeys. And so I've moved from Explore to Strategize, and I'll talk about why that is. So a method of sort of aligning on what goals, tasks, and journeys are most important. So you know what user journeys are. So there's critical user journeys. They're usually abbreviated CUJS. You also hear jobs to be done as well. So this is used to sort of understand what should we be focusing on. So there are lots of things that are needed sometimes, but we only have we have limited resources. So what should we be focusing on? How do we strategize? Where's the most pain when they're doing certain things? And so if you've done the journey mapping, and if you've done this direct observation, and you can also do your own brainstorming to come up with these as well, you probably end up with a lot of things. We word them this way, but you've come up with a lot of things that they're doing, okay? I want to blank, so I do this. So they have a certain goal, so they're doing a task to achieve that goal. And more likely, what you've ended up with is this. a lot of things. And so I like to show this. I don't know if this happens in your organizations, but you've got UX has like a bunch of fixes they want to do. Eng has got a bunch of fixes. And then you've got all these innovative ideas that we could do. And you've got a director saying, how can you work on all of that? We can't do all of it. So how do we figure out what's most important? I'll talk about one of the ways that we've done this. So using surveys, I'm sure you've all done ranking with a survey. This is just a screenshot taken right off the Qualtrics site. So this is not one of ours. And it's you could do ranking like this. This is one of the typical ways you might rank something. You might also do let the drag and drop in a list. You might have like where there's a field and you just number them, right? Everybody's done ranking like that. So you could have all those tasks and you could present them to a user. Let's give them 30 tasks. I don't know, we'll narrow it down and get them to rank this way, right? What's the problem with that? Anyone want to give me a... The order, okay. Anything else? Problem with, imagine, so this is a small list. Imagine you've got a list of 30 and you're asking people to rank like this. that too. So how many people have heard of MaxDiff? So, okay, a few people, right. So a few of the things, so you guys mentioned a few problems with this, but there's scale bias. Like what's 5 mean? What's 2 mean? Inaccurate capturing of the middle of the list. So if you're going to rank 30 things, like what do you think the difference between 14 and 17 is? Is that accurate? I mean, maybe number 1 and 2 are clear. Maybe the last ones are clear, but everything in the middle is sort of noise. And it shows you the order of importance when you rank like this, but not really the strength of importance. So you've got something that is number 1 and then you've got number 2, but how far out is number 1 from number 2? So the MaxDiff way. So this is something we've been doing at Google, and I've done it a couple times, 2 or 3 times. And it is a technique. It's tougher to design a survey this way, but this is, again, straight off the Qualtrics site. And you don't have to use Qualtrics to do this. I'm not promoting Qualtrics in any way, but it gives a list of things and it makes people do trade-offs. So the reason the design of this, though, is key is because you have to figure out the number of screens, how many. So you've got a list of 30. You may show a list of 6. And you may you have to design it so that each option has equal opportunity for being shown. And you want to make sure that the grouping is correct. You want to make sure these things are worded so that they're not, 2 of them are not too close to being the same. So it's really important how you design a MaxDiff survey. So there's time and effort put into that. And then also the analysis. But what's really nice is that you do get, and I'll show an output later, you do get a little bit more information in the middle. You get the strength of importance as well. So we'll move on past this, but keep that in your mind as a tool to use. So talking about outcome and putting some of these things together. So try to read this. This is all like hipster lorem ipsum. So, but this is an example of after we did all of that journey mapping, we took all of that into analysis and we put them up on boards. We made notes on all of them. And we came up with this process that people followed, and we found the loop backs through the process, and we put this together as a poster, and it was actually really enlightening to teams, to Eng, to PM, getting everybody on the same page of understanding what our users actually go through in this process. what's happening in their minds in phase 1, what's happening in phase 2, and what's happening in phase 3. This is an example of an output of that MaxDiff. So you'd have this list of CUJS, and you have the strength of importance. So you can see how much more important that top one is than the one below it. And it's actually a much more accurate ranking than just the other ranking methods. So this was used to actually give back to leadership, to show, okay, we've gone to users, we've surveyed a large set of users, we put the different things, so we found all of these different tasks and journeys that they could be doing. And here's how it looked with them. Now, other things went into this. So we also looked at frequency and found that some things that, although they weren't very important, were actually being done really frequently. So to us, that's still critical to get right. We also looked at relevance. So some things were more relevant for some users and less for others. And so when we plotted relevance against importance, we saw some that came up at the top. They were really important, but not relevant to everyone. And so that's when you have to actually look at your business strategy and understand, is that something we want to focus on? It is super important, but right now, maybe it's trending and it's going to be more relevant to more people. Maybe these are just leaders in the industry, and but it's something to keep an eye on. So just because this is how this plays out with users doesn't mean your strategy is, okay, those top 5, that's what we're going to do. You really have to look at what your business needs are as well. So another way that we use those journeys is to give people a visual. So when we were looking at, the red, the yellow, the green, and where things are breaking down, being able to visually represent this back to the team was really valuable. Being able to show pain points in relation to the entire process, because how many times do you get back in a research report, here are the pain points, but not really being able to see where they play out in the entire process. Comments. We've used these maps to allow people to see see these comments and these quotes and the feedback in context to what people are doing. And it's been helpful because there are times when we find that things that are happening at the end of the process really tie into problems that we had at the beginning of the process. So again, all of this kind of comes together to help paint this picture of where can we innovate? Where are things breaking down, and we can come up with a solution that our competitors aren't thinking about, because we've gone in and we've really sat with them, we've observed them, we've mapped out their process, and we've really tried to uncover what some of their needs are, why they're asking for certain things. There was an ask that was coming up in the team I was on before over and over and over again. And it seemed like a very odd ask. And we didn't understand why they were asking for that until we went in and watched how their business worked. The reason they were asking, there was a little piece of information basically that they were asking for. And it was because the team that was handling that part of the process could not communicate with the team that handled the beginning of the process. And so they had so much trouble trying to figure out when they would get this, basically it was an invoice. When they would get this invoice from us, they had a lot of trouble trying to figure out what it was connected to. And that was the reason they wanted that piece of information. That piece of information was the link to the other part of the process. And it was something that we didn't really understand until we went in and saw just how involved this process was in their organization. So, as I said before, making decisions about products with no solid understanding of how they'll be used in practice is risky. And what I hope is that by doing and implementing some of these things and looking at some of those more exploratory questions, you can help that be less risky. That's it.
We have time for questions. Who has questions for Keita?
Hi. So I like a lot of what you were saying with the foundational aspects of understanding some of these core problems before
Right.
you get into production, or sorry, even planning. But I'm curious. A lot of it seems very focused on qualitative. And I noticed you had also mentioned that you do some remote work in foundational studies. What is your typical sample size that you try to gather for that?
Yeah, with the qualitative work that we do, we are typically looking at sample sizes anywhere from 15 to about 25 with our qualitative work.
Other questions?
Just a follow-up. Thanks. That was a really awesome, informative talk.
Cool.
Just a follow-up, I guess, to this question is sort of where you're getting those sample sizes that you go after. Is it based on the population or?
Yeah, for what the work that I do, it is based on the population. So we typically have we know how many people are in the business, or let's say, like I work currently with administrators, system administrators, and so we'll know what that size is. We know how many customers we have and how many people are administrators, or even if we're looking outside of not just our customer base, we have an idea of how many administrators there are. So for the work that I do, we actually know how many people there are.
Thanks.
And we calculate based on that. So. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for sharing the insights. I think this is very, very informative. I think my question is, so there's usually an existing product life cycle. How long ahead of time do you need to get the insights in order for these results to feed into the product life cycle? And what does it look like for the process to play out?
Yeah, great question. I won't say that this is easy, but I like to look 3 quarters ahead. What's challenging about that is typically PM and Eng, they're not available to work on anything that's not like going out like right now. So their time is like super limited. But I want to like actually ask questions and talk about and plan for things that they are doing 3 quarters from now. And a lot of times it's really hard for them to give me that kind of time for something they're not doing right now. But I typically I want to know what's happening 3 quarters out.
Thank you.
Being unfamiliar with the MaxDiff process for surveys, the survey you showed earlier with just the 15 questions, 1 to 7 ranking, what's the best practice on how many times to represent those answers in the MaxDiff survey?
There's actually a formula for that. I don't know it off the top of my head, but there is a formula for, you can plug in how many options you have and how many screens you want them to see. So somebody brought up fatigue earlier when we were talking about surveys. One of the things you want to look at when designing a MaxDiff survey is how long that option is going, how many words you're going to have in that option. So the one that you saw there was pretty short, like 2 words. But if you are like wording a task, it might be 6 or 7 words. And then imagine if you have 7 of those and someone's got to read all of that and make a selection, and then you're going to show them 10 screens of that. They're going to get tired. So you really have to balance how many words you have. We spend a lot of time on trying to word the options. And we also probably went a screen or 2 over what the formula said, because we could not reduce our list. We wanted to do, say, maybe 28 CUJs, and we ended up we just couldn't drop 4. We had 32. So it'll give you a range of how many screens you should show.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Just to follow up on the MaxDiff.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you repeated the survey, how consistent are generally the results? And related to that, sort of through a product life cycle, would you expect a different ranking to appear for people who become accustomed to using the product versus new users?
Okay.
And how you manage that?
Okay. So tell me what your question.
So the first question is MaxDiff consistent
Right.
when you redo the surveys?
Okay.
2, how do you handle changes in user behavior, changes in preferences over time for the product? And 3, how do you know that you have necessarily the representative sample of the users that are going to be using your product versus sort of early adopters or not?
Right. Well, there was screening that went into, so I'll take your last one first. So we did screening to actually choose the population of people that were going to take it. So I think that relevance question, I think it's important to ask additional questions when you're doing the survey. So we were able to break down, for instance, what the importance looks like for these users versus does the ranking change when we just look at this population? Or we also, in ours, looked at industry as well. So what does it look like for industries that are very locked down with security? Maybe certain things are super important to them, but maybe not so important in another type of organization, or even size of the. So there were other things that we ask, and then we look at different slices, like how does the importance change? Because that was actually really interesting to us as well. And I think over time is another one. So when I was talking about seeing that relevance, I would be interested in if we ran that same MaxDiff survey a year from now, does that relevance actually move? Does it increase because now that particular CUJ, I can't mention what it is, but that particular thing has now in the industry become more relevant to more companies. So I think it's important to look at it over time. I would not suggest doing a MaxDiff survey on critical user journeys and just running with that. Like this is what's important for the next 5 years. Does that make sense?
Other questions? I go over here first.
Hello. So my question is, you mentioned sometimes the product and UX team, they don't know how to incorporate the UX research result and use it into the product cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And also through your presentation, your work is included in all 3 process: explore, design, assess. Sorry. So how do you in Google, how do you effectively collaborate between your researcher work and the design team? And how does the UX design team or product team effectively use your research result?
Yeah. So that's always an ongoing challenge. We try to do education on research. So we try to educate PM and Eng on how, not just UX, I know our design team tries to educate on what UX design is about and how they best should be used. And I'm sure you guys have experienced this, like we don't just do mocks. But same with research. So we also try to have education sessions because not everybody knows what goes into different methods. So they may think, can't you just do a survey and we can have the results next week? Or we just want to survey this number of people. So there are things about different methods that they don't understand. Also, maybe the questions that they're getting at, they're asking for a method, but not actually giving us the question they want to get at. So a lot of times that's just done through education. So ongoing education, trying to work out the best way for us all to collaborate together. Does that answer your question? There might have been more to it, more to your question.
Yeah, like I feel like because since your work is included in all three areas of the working process,
Right.
so work hand in hand with the design
Yes.
team, or
Yes.
do you have your own department?
Yes. So getting to that part of your question, we'll have like a research plan, and they'll have a roadmap for what they want to do, and we can plot out which research that we want to do at particular phases, and trying to time it so that we actually have the results back to them when they need it. So not you're going to do this and this is when we're going to do the research also, because in the research that I do, working with enterprise research, the recruiting takes a long time, and that could take 2 months to do recruiting. And so it's important for us to know their roadmap, their development, like when do you think you want to launch? When do you think you're going to do like alpha? When can we get like a prototype of something so that we can then plan our research against that? And so we kind of work together that way. And so we will have in the PRD, they might, they'll actually reference when certain parts of the research they expect to be completed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really insightful talk. I wasn't fully familiar with the critical user journeys before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you mentioned briefly this is somewhat similar to jobs to be done. Two-part question. So how similar and how dissimilar they might be.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned two things on critical journey maps, having clearly the main pain points and some quotes. But what would you say makes a really good critical CUJ or a not so good one?
Okay. I think I'll start with the last one first. I think what makes a CUJ not a great CUJ, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about this in my team, so this is not all just coming from me. We've done a lot of thinking on it. It's not perfect, but it is something that we think is important to, and again, I mentioned it's controversial, but we do think it's important to know what are the critical things people are trying to accomplish. So what I think is not a good one, and when we tell people to try to think of CUJs, is don't just go through your product menu and say everything, every task that's on here, that's a CUJ, or that's not the goal. So I as a banker, I want to run a report. Nobody wants to run a report. There's something else they want to do. The task is running the report. We have to get at the why they want to do it. So when I see CUJs that are worded like the task is actually the goal, then that tells me there's more work to be done to understand. And it's interesting how sometimes people don't know what that goal is. And it can change the way you design something. So somebody might have the same task to do, but their goal is different. And so the way that you present that task to them is maybe different. So really, I think that's one of the things that a properly written CUJ will tease out. And also, I didn't emphasize it in the screen, but also knowing who that I is. Who is that person that's actually doing that? So as a banker or as a IT admin or whatever the case may be. So that's, and now I think I've forgotten your earlier question.
Yeah, I think you've answered partially the earlier question, which is similarities and dissimilarities with a jobs to be done framework. So
one of the challenges with CUJs that we've encountered, and so if you find a solution, it would be great to know, is the granularity that you write these things at. So, it could be something very simple, like something that could be accomplished in 2 steps, and that someone could say is a critical user journey. Or it could be something that takes place over 2 weeks. Is that the critical user journey? So trying to understand the granularity that you want to write those at and then present those to users to rank, because if they're differing, if you've got a mix in your list of 30 of something that's huge and then something that's I need to click something, then that's not very balanced. So understanding the granularity with which to write them. Jobs to be done is a little bit a little bit broader. So I think of jobs to be done as something that does take weeks, maybe days, weeks to accomplish. One of the ways I ask that question, I ask people, what would you hire this feature for? And, usually you hire people to do jobs, and you don't think of people as hiring your software to do something, or hiring your product or a particular feature or idea that you're thinking of to do something for them. But I think it's an interesting question, and I've got a lot of interesting responses when I ask that way. So I tend to think of jobs to be done as something much more broad, and critical user journeys to be a little bit more scoped in.
Thanks so much.
Hey, so I find personally as a researcher that one of the hardest things to do is to get stakeholders to actually be willing to think 2-3 quarters ahead, so you can actually get to the point where you're doing the fun and juicy foundational work that we know provides so much value. And I'm wondering, this might be a bit of a throwaway question because I'm sure it's different at every company, but if you have any suggestions for ways to try, sometimes people aren't even, they have no idea what they're doing in 3 quarters yet, like bluntly speaking. And if you have any suggestions around that kind of problem.
Ooh, yeah, well, building relationships, I find is really helpful. Trying to get a hold of roadmaps, if you can. They exist. I know typically people are not. They're not. The projects that they may show you are just for like the next quarter or the one after that. But if you talk to the right people, there are some things in early stage, things they may not have written up yet. That you can, if you have those relationships built, you can sit down and have discussions like, so what are you thinking about? Like, what are you guys looking at over the next year? And trying to like, well, I can throw some of those questions into something I'm doing now and start feeding into that. So I have an exercise that I like to do with them of like having a spreadsheet. I typically will ask, like, what are all your research questions? What are all the questions you have? And I'll start bucketing them sort of like what you saw there, but I actually have another spreadsheet that has a fourth bucket. And I'll start showing them where a lot of your questions fall right here in the design phase. Like, what else do you want to know? And sometimes the questions they're asking are exploratory questions. And so being able to tease those out and being able to show them you've got 2 exploratory questions and you've got like 30 of these. Is there anything else you want to know? So just having those discussions. But it is hard. I won't lie. It's a challenge. I think in most companies, getting anybody to think that far out and getting them to think that it's even valuable to expend researcher resources there. So even if they think, those are great questions. We've got 3 researchers though, so we really need them doing what's going to be launching like next quarter. Oh yeah, it's hard to make a case for foundational research. But I don't really understand, how you actually get at innovating and really uncovering these opportunities for innovation unless you're doing some of that, just going in and watching. Just watching, asking questions, no specific agenda sometimes. I mean, sometimes it's exploratory around a specific topic, but sometimes it could just be watching.
Hi, thank you for sharing. It's a great talk. I'm wondering, you had mentioned recruiting and that it takes a couple months. Can you describe a bit about your process and the difficulties?
For recruiting? So the reason with enterprise recruiting, it's a challenge, especially with the work that I've been doing on the teams that I've been on, because they're very specialized people within the company. And so people are busy. So it's hard to get their time, and there's just not as many of them. And so the challenge comes from trying to get a recruiter to hone in on exactly who inside the company it is that you want to talk to. So their job titles, as you guys all know, are all over the place. So it's difficult to give them a job title to look for. So part of that is just working with the recruiter, making sure you have a recruiter who understands what your needs are. So we have some that we're used to working with. We also have vendors that are used to working with us, so they sort of know our space and know the people that we're looking for. But also, when we get back a list, we look at it and it's like, these are still not quite the people that we need. So people are getting paid, and so there's always that. There are people who will, falsify their way through a screener to participate in something, especially if they know it's Google. There are obviously ones that we do that are blind, but if they know it's Google and it is people want to participate. So going through and just really trying to hone in on the right person, the person who has the right motivations for participating, that takes a while. So, and then the scheduling of it. So scheduling things while people are at work, especially if you wanted 2 hours with them, because for foundational research, I love to have like at least an hour and a half with people to really get through the journey mapping, to be able to ask lots of questions. And to get that much time, you might schedule it and then it falls through. And so, yeah, it takes time. And then the analyzing of all of that, it's a lot.
I think we have time for one more question. Okay.
Follow up on the last one. So you've recruited a number of participants for the study.
Mm-hmm.
Do you or your team put any sort of effort into fostering those relationships to be able to re-tap into those participants who might have been really good fits for that kind of project work that might be useful in the future? Or do you lose retainment of those relationships because you're working with vendors? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. When we work with a vendor, we, aren't given access typically to them. So we could reach out to the vendor and ask to reuse, but we do reuse people, but it depends on what it's for, because then you start to get another type of bias. When you start to have the same people over and over, they like you, they like working with you, they like being part of a study. And so we have to try to account for that. But it depends on what we're looking for. If we think it's something that's not really going to be biased as to whether, like for instance, an information needs study. We were recently doing a diary study where we're just asking a few times every day, what information did you need? What information did you need? What information did you need? That is something where we actually need people to be engaged. We need participants who are going to want to do that for 5 days, 3 times a day, and actually answer the question with a meaningful answer, and probably working with a set of people that we are familiar with would be more conducive to something like that. I mean, it depends. Obviously, every study is different, and every, the context that you're doing the research is different. But for us, that is something where how much they like us may not really be that biasing, but so it depends. We don't always reuse though.
Okay, give Keita a big round of applause. Thank you.